Imagine waking up tomorrow.
Okay.
Your town is, well, it's completely ordinary. It's a place driven entirely by the momentum of routine. You know the vibe.
Right. Just the daily grind.
Exactly. People are waking up, they're rushing to get to work, maybe agonizing over their emails, trying to make money, and just coming home exhausted.
A very relatable scenario for most of us, honestly.
Right. So you step outside your front door to grab your morning coffee, and there, right on your pristine, freshly swept doorstep, is a dead rat.
Wow. Yeah, that would be a shock.
You probably assume it's a prank or, maybe a stray cat left it there. You are annoyed. It's just this ugly smudge on your perfectly curated morning.
You probably just toss it in the trash and try to forget about it.
Exactly. But then the next day, there are 10 dead rats.
Okay, now that is a serious problem.
And it gets worse. A week later, there are hundreds. A week after that, thousands of them are pouring out of the city sewers, staggering onto the sidewalks, and dying right in the streets.
It's horrifying. Just a total nightmare.
You are trapped in a city that is suddenly, basically bleeding out from its underground.
Yeah.
What do you even do?
That is the incredibly visceral, deeply unsettling scenario that kicks off the material we are analyzing today.
And it really grabs you right by the throat.
It really does. We are looking at a huge stack of literary critiques, historical reviews, and philosophical analyses, and they are all centered entirely on Albert Camus's 1947 existential masterpiece, The Plague or La Peste.
Right.
And looking at the sheer volume of analysis here, it becomes immediately apparent that to view this merely as a story about a public health crisis is to, fundamentally misunderstand the text.
Yeah, that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We're going to look right past the literal bacteria.
Because there's so much more happening beneath the surface.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack how this novel serves as a masterclass on human psychology during moments of ultimate, inescapable crisis.
It's fascinating how people react when they have absolutely no control.
It is. We are going to explore this chilling, deeply uncomfortable concept.
Yeah.
Our sources refer to as the habit of evil.
The habit of evil, that phrase just sticks with you.
It really does. And later, we are going to navigate the highly debated, complex metaphors for political occupation, totalitarianism, and colonialism.
All of which are woven directly into the fabric of this narrative.
So, to really grasp the weight of what happens, we have to first understand the environment where this disaster takes root.
The setting is everything here.
Right. So the story is set in Oran, which is a coastal city in Algeria.
And the sources focus heavily on this, the Oran that Camus describes is not a place of romance or, vibrant culture.
No, it's actually described as remarkably ugly.
Very ugly. It is dry, it is flat, and it is intensely, relentlessly mercantile.
The sources pull a specific phrase that really stuck with me. It's a city where people don't truly live, they just manage their lives.
I love that distinction. It is crucial. Oran is a city built entirely on habit rather than wonder or reflection.
It's all about efficiency.
Exactly. The citizens are completely absorbed in the mechanics of commerce. They work relentlessly all week.
And then what do they do on the weekends?
Well, they just perform the mechanical acts of leisure. They go to the cinema, they sit at cafes, they play cards.
Going through the motions.
Right. There is no spiritual depth to their existence. The literary analyses we're looking at point out that Camus deliberately strips the city of natural beauty.
Yeah, there are no pigeons, no trees, no gardens.
You only know it's spring because the temperature gets a little hotter and, young vendors bring in baskets of flowers from the suburbs.
Nature is completely shut out, both physically and psychologically.
It's a city that rejects the very concept of tragedy because everyone is simply too busy.
And frankly, that feels uncomfortably familiar.
It hits very close to home.
Think about how so many of us live right now. Head down, staring at a screen, completely insulated from the natural world and the broader universe.
Just blocked off by a wall of appointments and obligations.
Exactly. We operate on the assumption that tomorrow will look exactly like today.
And that profound insulation is the exact vulnerability that the plague exploits.
It finds the weak spot.
It does. In a society that does not believe in the unexpected, a catastrophe does not announce itself with a thunderclap or dramatic scream.
It sneaks in.
Right. It sneaks in as a trivial detail. It arrives as something small and annoying that is much easier to ignore than to confront.
Which brings us right back to that first dead rat on the doorstep.
The inciting incident.
Exactly. So the narrator of the novel, this pragmatic physician named Dr. Bernard Rieux, has a doorman named Michel.
And Michel is the one who finds this first dead rat on the landing of their building.
And his reaction is just fascinating because it is so deeply, stubbornly human.
He isn't terrified at all.
No. He doesn't think about disease or infection. He is insulted.
He considers it an offense to his professional dignity. I mean, Michel keeps a clean building.
So to him, a rat simply cannot exist there.
Exactly, unless some malicious neighborhood kids put it there as a joke.
The psychological defense mechanism kicks in instantly. He forces this bizarre anomaly to fit right into his existing, comfortable worldview.
It's much easier to blame kids than to confront a biological threat.
But the anomaly refuses to stay small. The rats start coming out in droves.
They crawl out of the basements, they stagger into the daylight, they spin around, spit blood, and die.
It's such a graphic, disturbing image.
It is. Soon, the city sanitation department is collecting them by the tens of thousands every single day.
And here is where the psychology of the broader city, including the authorities, becomes the real focal point of the analysis.
Because the citizens and the government, they just go into a state of profound, impenetrable denial.
The historical reviews in our stack draw heavy parallels here. They compare this moment in the novel to how administrative bodies react to impending disasters in the real world.
The authorities delay declaring an official plague because the truth is quite literally too expensive.
It's an economic impossibility for them.
Right. To declare a plague means stopping commerce.
It means shutting down the port.
It means halting the very engine that gives Oran its identity.
So instead of taking immediate action, what do the authorities do? They retreat into bureaucracy.
They debate terminology. Typical administrative behavior.
Exactly. The medical committee argues over whether they can definitively call it a plague, or if they should refer to it as, quote, special type of fever with inguinal complications.
They issue these pathetic half measures. They put up posters with mild warnings that blend right in with the local advertisements.
They just do everything in their power to avoid acknowledging the monster that has just walked into the room.
I want to try and understand the mechanics of that denial because, it's easy for us to sit here with hindsight and judge them.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about it like a check engine light on a car. You hear a rattle, the light comes on. You don't immediately pull over and tear the engine apart.
No, you turn up the radio.
Right. But it's not just that you're ignoring the light, you're turning up the radio. Because if you acknowledge the rattle, you have to admit you can't afford the mechanic.
Wow, that is a perfect analogy. The people of Oran can't afford a plague.
Not just financially, but psychologically.
Acknowledging it means their entire comfortable modern worldview just collapses.
So is this initial denial driven by genuine ignorance, or is it a willful arrogance?
A stubborn refusal to accept that our highly managed administrative lives can be violently interrupted.
The analyses heavily support the latter. It is an arrogance born of modernity.
Because by the mid-20th century, humanity really felt it had conquered nature.
Exactly, through medicine, infrastructure, and just, administrative scheduling.
The citizens of Oran, and particularly the French authorities running the city, assume that plagues are historical relics.
They think plagues belong to the Middle Ages. They belong to unhygienic, unorganized societies.
They certainly do not belong in a modern organized territory on the Mediterranean coast.
They honestly believe that disaster is something that happens to other people in other eras.
The subconscious delusion is that they are totally exempt from the cruelties of the natural world.
But nature, in the form of this bacillus, is entirely indifferent to their administrative confidence.
The bureaucracy just cannot legislate the bacteria away.
And that reality shatters the illusion very violently.
Because the rats eventually stop dying, don't they?
They do. They just disappear from the streets.
And for a brief moment, the city breathes a sigh of relief, thinking the weird anomaly has passed.
But the rats haven't disappeared because the disease is gone. They've disappeared because the disease has found a new host.
The humans start dying.
And the very first human casualty is Michel.
The doorman who was so deeply offended by the first rat.
Yes. He succumbs to a violent, agonizing fever. His lymph nodes swell, his body is racked with pain, and he dies a terrifying death.
Turning up the radio doesn't drown out the rattle anymore.
The engine is actively on fire.
The death toll spikes from 1 to a dozen to hundreds in a matter of days.
The math just becomes undeniable. The denial is no longer sustainable.
This forces the hand of the authorities. The tepid posters and semantic debates are just thrown out the window.
An official mandate comes down from the capital.
And that mandate contains 2 simple, devastating directives. Declare a state of plague and close the town.
The city gates of Oran slam shut.
No one goes in, and absolutely no one goes out.
And this isn't just a physical quarantine.
No. According to the literary critiques we are reviewing, the closing of the gates triggers a fundamental shift in the reality of the people trapped inside.
It alters the very nature of human consciousness in the city.
The sources describe a chilling transformation in how the citizens experience time.
Time completely flattens.
Now, what does that actually mean functionally?
Well, think about how you structure your consciousness. Your present is always informed by your anticipation of the future.
Right. You have weekend plans.
You have a vacation coming up in 2 months. You have career goals. You are saving for a house.
Your mind is always projecting forward.
But the moment those gates close, the future is instantly canceled. All plans are null and void.
You become trapped in a permanent, terrifying now.
The city becomes a giant waiting room.
But a waiting room where no one knows what they are waiting for, or if their name will ever be called.
Exactly. The days just blur into an indistinguishable mass of heat and anxiety.
The citizens become exiles in their own homes.
And the most immediate, agonizing consequence of that exile is separation.
The plague violently severs human connections.
Husbands who are traveling for work are locked out, leaving their families inside.
Lovers who lived in different towns are suddenly cut off with no idea when they will see each other again.
There is a specific character the sources focus on to illustrate this agony.
Raymond Rambert. Right?
Yes, Rambert. He is a French journalist from Paris.
And he was only in Oran on a short assignment, wasn't he?
Right, to research the living conditions of the local Arab population.
An assignment, ironically, he never even completes.
Because when the gates close, he is trapped.
He is a man who fundamentally does not belong to this tragedy.
That is exactly his argument. He has a wife waiting for him back in Paris.
So he goes to the authorities and argues his case with intense logic.
He says, look, I am not from here. I have no ties to Oran. You must let me leave.
But the bureaucracy is completely inflexible.
The plague does not recognize citizenship or zip codes.
When the legal channels fail, Rambert turns to the criminal underworld.
He desperately tries to arrange for smugglers to sneak him past the city guards.
Rambert's initial reaction is that fierce, almost entirely self-centered instinct to prioritize personal love over collective disaster.
He just wants to save his own narrative and leave everyone else to burn.
But as this lockdown drags on from weeks into months, the psychological atmosphere of the city shifts again.
And this is where the analyses get profoundly disturbing.
Because the true horror of the plague, as identified by these sources, isn't just the physical symptoms of the disease.
No, it's the psychological adaptation to it.
It is what Camus famously calls the habit of evil.
This concept is perhaps the most vital psychological insight in the entire novel.
The sources argue that the plague achieves its ultimate victory, not when it kills a body, but when it makes death ordinary.
The normalization of the unimaginable.
Exactly. In the early days of the outbreak, every single death is a shock.
When someone dies, the whole neighborhood mourns. Families hold elaborate funerals, they buy customized coffins, they grieve openly.
But as the bodies continue to pile up by the hundreds, that level of emotional engagement becomes impossible to sustain.
The funerals are sped up, they become quick, hygienic, administrative tasks.
The sources detail how the supply of coffins actually runs out, so they have to start recycling them.
They dump a body in a grave, spray it with quicklime, take the coffin back, wipe it down with disinfectant, and use it for the very next victim.
It's so morbid. And eventually, even that is too slow.
They have to repurpose the city's streetcars.
The same streetcars people used to take to the beach.
Right, they use them to transport mountains of corpses out to massive burn pits.
And how do the citizens react to this horrific industrialization of death?
They stop crying.
They're simply too exhausted.
The tragedy transitions from being a series of agonizing individual losses into a mere daily statistic read over the radio.
A death toll of 150 is just a number.
I want to ground this in our reality right now because it's highly relevant.
Oh, absolutely. Think about how we consume news in the modern digital age.
You see a tragedy on Monday, a terrible headline, a natural disaster, a war, and you are genuinely devastated.
It ruins your day.
But if that exact same tragedy happens every single day for months,
by Friday, you are just doom scrolling right past it. It becomes background noise.
How do we hold on to our humanity when the abnormal becomes the daily routine?
That is the core existential threat that Camus is mapping out here.
The tragedy shifts from biological death to a collective loss of empathy.
The human heart simply cannot process 1,000 tragedies a day, so it just shuts down to protect itself.
The literary critics point out a fascinating paradox here, too.
What's that?
The plague is an entirely collective experience. Everyone is under the same lockdown, facing the same threat, eating the same rationed food.
Yet the suffering is intensely personal and isolating.
Everyone is on their own deserted island, but all the islands are trapped in the exact same hurricane.
Well, that's a great way to put it. You can't share your specific, nuanced pain with your neighbor because your neighbor is drowning in their own identical pain.
There is no surplus of empathy to go around.
And this collective exhaustion creates a profound crisis of action.
To survive this flattening of existence, to resist this habit of evil, the people of Oran have to make a conscious choice about how to act.
Because they are in a world that has suddenly lost all its meaning, fairness, and predictability.
You can no longer just be a passive participant in your life.
The extremity of the situation forces you to adopt a survival philosophy.
Which brings us perfectly into the character analyses.
Yes, the sources are very clear that the main characters in this novel are not just people.
They are deliberate philosophical responses to the absurdity of the crisis.
Let's start with our narrator, Dr. Rieux.
Dr. Rieux is the embodiment of pragmatic, exhausted resistance.
He is a healer.
But what is crucial to understand about Rieux's philosophy is that he completely rejects the idea of grand heroism.
He does not view himself as a savior at all.
No, he knows that his medical interventions are largely useless against the plague. He is fighting a losing battle.
The sources highlight a moment where he explicitly compares his work to a never-ending defeat.
Yes, but he continues to work 20-hour days anyway.
Walking from one dying patient to the next, lancing boils and administering useless serums.
Why does he do it? Because of simple, stubborn human decency.
He refuses to be complicit with the plague.
In a universe that is absurd, where innocent people die arbitrary, agonizing deaths for absolutely no reason, Rieux's rebellion is simply doing his job.
He believes that the only way to fight the plague is with common decency.
He strips away all the ideological noise.
He doesn't need a grand narrative to justify helping people.
Which brings him into direct volatile conflict with another major archetype in the city.
Father Paneloux.
Yes, Father Paneloux. He represents the institutional, theological response to crisis.
He is an erudite, highly respected Jesuit priest.
And in the first month of the plague, when the city is still grappling with the shock, Paneloux delivers a fiery, packed sermon at the cathedral.
He provides a ready-made, absolute meaning for the suffering.
He preaches that the plague is a divine punishment.
He tells the congregation, quote, "Calamity has come on you, my brethren, you deserved it."
He uses the metaphor of God's flail, threshing the wheat from the chaff.
For Paneloux, the plague is not arbitrary at all. It is a necessary divine correction for the sins of the city.
It is the ultimate "you brought this on yourselves" argument.
It's an attempt to impose human logic, crime, and punishment onto a biological event.
But Rieux fiercely rejects that framework.
Because if you truly accept that the disease is the righteous will of God, then fighting the disease becomes a rebellion against God.
Right. Rieux tells another character that he refuses to love a scheme of things in which children are put to torture.
And the ideological certainty of Father Paneloux is violently tested later in the novel.
The sources spent a lot of time analyzing a pivotal scene regarding this.
The scene with the young boy.
Yes. Paneloux, alongside Rieux, has to watch a young, entirely innocent boy die a protracted, excruciating death from the plague.
It is a brutal scene. The child suffers endlessly, crying out until he finally expires.
And Rieux turns to Paneloux and says, angrily, "That child, anyhow, was innocent, and you know it as well as I do."
The death of the child completely shatters Paneloux's neat theological framework.
You just cannot explain away the agony of a child as a punishment for sin.
It breaks his ability to rationalize the disaster.
Following that trauma, Paneloux delivers a second sermon.
And the sources note a subtle but profound shift in his language here.
In the first sermon, he used the pronoun you who sinned.
In the second, he uses we.
He acknowledges the incomprehensible nature of the suffering.
He argues that the believer must simply accept the unfathomable will of God, even when it demands the death of children.
He pushes his faith to its absolute, agonizing extreme.
He eventually refuses medical treatment when he himself falls ill.
It's a truly tragic trajectory.
Now, let's look at a character who approaches this from a completely secular angle.
Jean Tarrou.
Yes, Tarrou. He is one of the most fascinating figures in the text.
He is an outsider, a man of independent means who just happens to be in Oran when the gates close.
But instead of trying to escape like Rambert, Tarrou throws himself entirely into the fire.
He is the one who organizes the volunteer sanitation squads.
These are the groups of ordinary citizens who risk their lives to carry the stretchers and enforce the quarantine.
But his motivation isn't strictly medical, is it?
No, his motivation is deeply moral and philosophical.
Camus reveals to Rieux that long before this biological plague, he realized that human society itself is infected with a psychological plague.
He had witnessed his father, a prosecuting attorney, casually demand the death penalty for a man in court.
Rieux realized that society is built on systems of violence, judgment, and execution.
He says that everyone carries the plague inside them.
The capacity to harm, to judge, to be complicit in the suffering of others.
Exactly. Rieux's life goal is to become a, quote, saint without God.
He wants to live in a state of hypervigilance, ensuring that he never, even accidentally, breathes his infection onto someone else.
His morality is based entirely on human solidarity and minimizing harm.
Independent of any divine reward or punishment.
Organizing the sanitation squads is his way of actively fighting the quote-unquote plague of human indifference.
Then you have the complete inverse of Rieux.
Cottard.
Cottard, the opportunist.
Cottard is a man who, before the outbreak, was literally suicidal.
He is a criminal who committed a crime that is never explicitly named.
But he was living in a state of intense paranoia, isolated and terrified that the police were coming to arrest him.
When the plague hits and civil order breaks down, the police are suddenly too busy managing corpses to investigate old crimes.
The disaster is his salvation.
The psychological pressure is lifted.
But more than that, Cottard thrives because now everyone in the city lives in a state of absolute fear and isolation.
Which is exactly how he has been living for years.
The chaos normalizes his internal state.
He profits heavily off the black market, smuggling goods into the quarantine city.
He is the archetype of the individual who benefits from societal collapse.
The one who finds comfort in the destruction of the social contract.
And finally, we have to talk about Grant.
The municipal clerk.
He is, on paper, the most boring man in the world. He's the definition of the absurd.
He spends all his free time trying to write a novel, but he is completely paralyzed by perfectionism.
He spends months endlessly rewriting the very first sentence of his book.
It's about an Amazon woman riding a horse through a park, right?
Yes. And he can never get the adjectives exactly right.
He is a comical figure, but the sources emphasize that Camus treats him with immense respect.
Because this absurd, inarticulate little man who cannot even finish a single sentence quietly volunteers to join Tallo's sanitation squads.
He takes on the exhausting, unglamorous administrative work, keeping the statistics, managing the schedules late into the night after working his day job.
He isn't doing it for glory. He just says, there's a plague. We have to defend ourselves.
He represents the quiet, unassuming, stubborn decency of ordinary people.
But looking at all these characters, Rieux, Panelou, Tarou, Cottard, Graham, we have to address a major literary critique that surfaces in our materials.
And it is a sharp one.
It is a critique regarding the construction of the novel itself.
The critical sources argue that a major flaw in The Plague is that these characters are incredibly two-dimensional.
They are flat.
They are essentially walking philosophical arguments rather than flesh and blood human beings.
The critique suggests they act purely as mouthpieces for Camus' various existential viewpoints.
We rarely feel a deep, visceral, emotional connection to them because they lack the messy, contradictory inner lives of real people.
Rieux represents science and pragmatism.
Panelou represents institutional religion.
Terry represents secular morality.
Cottard represents chaos.
One of the sources actually points to a specific rare moment to highlight what is missing from the rest of the book.
It highlights a fleeting moment of genuine, quiet emotion for Dr. Rieux.
He comes home at 2 a.m, absolutely decimated by exhaustion, covered in the stench of the hospital.
And his elderly mother is sitting there in a chair, waiting for him.
She doesn't speak. She just looks at him with this silent, unwavering, comforting gaze.
The critical source argues this is one of the only moments where we feel Rieux as a vulnerable, fragile human son, rather than just an ideological pillar.
The complaint is that there are only a handful of sentences like this in the entire text.
The argument is that if Camus had spent time developing their emotional complexities, their petty jealousies, their nuanced fears, their complex loves, the novel would have packed a much harder emotional punch.
Instead, we get archetypes.
Okay, I hear that critique, and from a traditional literary standpoint, it makes sense. But I want to push back on this.
I wonder if his flatness is not a flaw, but a deeply intentional feature of the book.
How so?
Think about what the plague functionally does to a society. The plague flattens everything.
It strips away your hobbies, your complex personality traits, your career ambitions.
When you are pushed to the absolute jagged edge of survival, when death is a mathematical certainty surrounding you, maybe you do become just a single core moral choice.
Are you going to carry the stretcher? Are you going to hide? Or are you going to sell smuggled cigarettes?
Maybe the cardboard nature of the characters is a perfect reflection of how extreme, protracted disaster reduces human beings to their barest moral instincts.
That is an elegant defense of the text, but the critical sources maintain that while it may be philosophically justified, it still weakens the novel as a piece of literature.
If the reader does not care about the characters as breathing people, the philosophical stakes lose their emotional teeth.
It risks alienating the reader in the service of an intellectual exercise.
That tension between philosophy and narrative is always tricky.
But this debate over the characters perfectly sets the stage for the next major layer of our analysis.
Because these archetypes aren't just fighting a biological bacillus.
According to all the historical and critical literature we are reviewing, they are fighting much larger, real-world horrors.
This brings us to the grand metaphors of the novel.
The plague is universally recognized not just as a story of disease, but as a deeply coded, multi-layered allegory.
And the most immediate, explicitly recognized metaphor is the Nazi occupation of France during World War II.
This was the immediate context of Camus's life. He published the book in 1947, just a couple of years after the war ended.
Camus himself had been active in the French resistance, editing an underground newspaper.
In this historical reading, the plague, the rats that suddenly invade the city and bring systemic death, represents the fascist forces of Nazi Germany occupying France.
The suddenness of the lockdown, the closing of the gates of Oran, mirrors the shock and isolation of the fall of Paris.
And those character archetypes we just debated map onto this historical reality perfectly.
They map with pinpoint accuracy.
Rieux and his volunteer sanitation squads represent the men and women of the French resistance, risking their lives in the underground fight.
Cotard, the man who thrives in the chaos and profits off the black market, represents the collaborators.
The French citizens who enriched themselves by working with the occupying Nazi forces.
And Rambert, the journalist who just wants to escape to his wife, represents the everyday people who initially viewed the war as a political nuisance that didn't concern them.
They just wanted to retreat into their private lives.
But eventually, Rambert has a change of heart. Right as his smugglers are ready to sneak him out, he decides to stay.
He realizes, as he says, that it is shameful to be happy alone, and he joins Rieux's squads.
He realizes that in the face of absolute tyranny, neutrality is not an option.
And of course, the eventual receding of the plague at the end of the novel mirrors the liberation of France.
But our analytical sources do not stop in the 1940s.
They argue that the metaphor of the plague is remarkably elastic, extending into modern political history.
The second major metaphorical framework they explore is modern totalitarianism.
And to be clear to you listening, we are relaying the specific analytical perspectives presented in our source material here.
The sources draw explicit, detailed parallels between the biological mechanisms of the plague and the psychological mechanisms of oppressive regimes.
Specifically, they cite figures like Saddam Hussein, the Ba'ath Party, and various regional militias as modern iterations of these human plagues.
The structural similarities highlighted by the analysis are striking. How does an authoritarian regime operate?
It acts as a sudden, overwhelming force that dictates the boundaries of life.
It kills arbitrarily, it enforces strict control over movement, and it displaces populations.
The citizens living under a dictatorship experience the exact same flattening of time that the citizens of Oran experienced.
Because in a totalitarian state, you don't control your future. The state does.
Exactly. The psychological adaptation is identical.
Citizens living under oppressive militias or dictatorships develop the same habit of evil.
When violence, disappearances, and arbitrary arrests become a daily occurrence, the population becomes numb to it.
The initial shock wears off, and survival dictates that you keep your head down.
You become desensitized to the daily statistics of the missing.
Tyranny, in this reading, is not just a political system.
It is a profound infection of the social fabric that isolates individuals and drains them of their empathetic capacity.
It's a terrifyingly accurate mapping of how oppression operates on a cellular psychological level.
But there is a third metaphor, a third layer of critical analysis provided in our sources.
And this one is not about what the book includes, but what the book actively excludes.
It is a critique that fundamentally challenges the universalist reading of the novel.
Yes. This is the post-colonial critique, heavily influenced by the work of scholars like Edward Said.
And to understand this critique, we have to look very closely at the physical geography of the novel.
Camus set the story in Oran.
He did. Oran is a major city in Algeria. At the time the novel was written, Algeria was a French colony.
It was an Arab Islamic city, populated overwhelmingly by indigenous Algerians, alongside a population of French colonizers.
But if you read The Plague, you will encounter a glaring, almost surreal absence.
The Arab population is essentially erased from the text.
They are completely marginalized, rendered almost invisible.
The main characters, the doctors, the journalists, the administrators, the priests, are all French or of European descent.
The victims whose deaths we mourn, the people whose philosophical struggles we follow, are French.
The native population of the city in which the novel is set is reduced to background noise.
It would be like writing a deeply philosophical novel about a disaster striking modern-day Manhattan and never mentioning a single person who isn't a European tourist.
It's not just an oversight, it's an active, structural erasure.
Our critical sources argue vehemently that this erasure is not accidental, nor is it benign.
They propose that the novel is inextricably tied to the French imperial mindset.
In this reading, The Plague isn't a metaphor for fascism at all. It symbolizes the deep, subterranean psychological anxiety of the French colonizers.
The dread that something is bubbling up from the underground.
Exactly. It represents the subconscious fear of the impending, inevitable uprising of the colonized Algerian people.
The colonizers have built a sterile, mercantile reality on top of a land that is not theirs.
And the plague represents the violent reality of the colonized pushing back, threatening to destroy the colonizers' comfortable administration.
Wow, so when the rats come crawling out of the dark basements to die on the clean French doorsteps, that is a manifestation of colonial guilt and terror.
That is the argument put forward by post-colonial scholars.
The sources delve into Camus' own highly complex, deeply conflicted background to explain this.
Camus was what was known as a Pied Noir. He was born in Algeria to working-class French parents.
He was deeply, passionately in love with the Algerian landscape. The sun, the sea, the desert.
But culturally and politically, his identity was tied to France.
Our sources use the term schizophrenic to describe his identity crisis.
He was caught in an impossible middle ground. He advocated for better treatment and political rights for Arabs in Algeria, but he could never bring himself to support full Algerian independence.
He could not reconcile his love for his homeland with the idea that the French, and by extension, he himself might not belong there.
So his own internal, unresolvable political conflict bleeds directly into his art.
He attempts to write a universal masterpiece about human resistance against abstract tyranny.
But he places it in a violently colonized city while entirely ignoring the oppressed people who actually live there.
I want to pose a question to you, the listener. Think about a piece of art or literature that you deeply admire.
Can a book be a beautiful, profound manual for human resilience? Can Dr. Rieux's struggle against the absurd universe remain a universal truth? If the author's colonial blindness actively erases the marginalized people living in the very streets he is describing.
Does the historical failure of the author invalidate the existential truth of the text?
It is a profound and uncomfortable contradiction.
The sources suggest that Camus' inability to resolve this post-colonial tension is a major reason why the novel feels so deeply melancholic and unresolved.
It is a story of resistance written by a man who, in the context of the Algerian war that was soon to follow, found himself structurally on the side of the occupier.
It adds such a heavy, tragic, almost ironic layer to the entire book.
But to return to the immediate narrative of the city of Oran, after months of this grinding, multi-layered suffering, whether you view it as a literal disease, a metaphor for a fascist occupation, or the dread of colonial collapse, the situation finally begins to change.
Yes. The plague begins to retreat.
This happens partly due to a new, more effective serum developed by an older colleague of Rieux's, Dr. Castel.
But primarily, the sources note, the disease simply seems to have run its natural, exhausting biological course.
The death toll stabilizes, and then slowly begins to drop.
By January, the plague recedes back into the shadows. The authorities observe the metrics, and finally the mandate comes down.
The gates of Oran are open.
You can imagine the sensory explosion of that moment.
The trains start running again. Ships return to the harbor.
The city erupts in wild, desperate, intoxicating celebration.
Lovers who have been separated for nearly a year are finally reunited on the train platforms, clinging to each other.
It feels like the setup for a triumphant, cinematic, happy ending. The nightmare is over.
But Camus, being a strict existentialist, refuses to give us the comfort of a clean resolution.
Tragedy still strikes, and it strikes brutally right at the finish line.
This is where the absurdity of the universe asserts itself most aggressively.
Jean Theroux, the man who organized the resistance, the man who fought so vigilantly to be a secular saint and minimize harm, catches the plague in the very final days.
He dies a grueling, agonizing death in Dr. Rieux's home, just as the city outside is preparing to celebrate its liberation.
It's absolutely heartbreaking. He survives the worst of the horror, only to be taken by a stray bullet at the end of the war.
And Rieux's suffering doesn't end there.
Shortly after Tara's death, Dr. Rieux receives a telegram.
His wife, who had been away at a sanatorium in the mountains before the gates even closed, has passed away from her own chronic illness.
Rieux survives the plague, he does his duty, but he loses his closest friend and his wife in the span of days.
He loses everything he was holding on to.
And then there's Cod. The resolution for Catard is entirely different, but equally tragic.
For Catard, the opening of the gates is not a liberation. It is an absolute catastrophe.
The return to normal means the return of the police, the return of investigations, the return of his paranoia.
Losing the chaotic safe haven that the plague provided, his mind simply snaps.
He goes completely mad. He barricades himself inside his apartment, stockpiles ammunition, and starts shooting randomly down into the crowds of celebrating citizens in the street.
The police eventually have to storm his building and violently arrest him.
It is a chaotic, messy, deeply unsettling resolution.
Which leads us directly into the ultimate philosophical conclusion of the novel, as analyzed by our sources.
The central theme of this ending is the fundamental absurdity of survival.
What do you mean by the absurdity of survival?
The sources unpack this meticulously. The victory over the plague is purely temporary, and more importantly, it is devoid of moral logic.
There is no grand lesson handed down from the heavens.
There is no divine justice separating the good from the bad.
Theroux, the most moral man in the city, dies. Grand, the absurd, comical little clerk who caught the plague earlier, miraculously recovers for no medical reason.
Rieux's innocent wife dies miles away from the infection.
Survival is just as arbitrary, just as mathematically random as death.
The universe remains entirely indifferent to human concepts of fairness.
Exactly. But what Camus spends the final pages highlighting is the absurdity of the human reaction to this survival.
As the city celebrates in the streets, fireworks going off, Dr. Rieux stands on a balcony and observes the crowds.
And he realizes that people are already forgetting.
The amnesia of survival.
Yes, they're immediately forgetting the deep, agonizing lessons of the tragedy.
They are rushing headlong back into their commerce, their petty arguments, their rigid routines.
They are returning to the exact state of mind that made them so vulnerable to the plague in the first place.
They fail to realize that this peace is not a permanent victory. It is just a fragile, temporary truce.
I think about that desperate rush to normalcy. It's a powerful instinct.
It's like a community deciding to rebuild a massive, intricate sandcastle right at the water's edge.
You know, logically, based on all historical and scientific evidence, that the tide is going to come back eventually and wash the entire structure away.
The ocean always returns, but you build the sandcastle anyway.
You smooth out the walls, you big the moat, and you collectively pretend the ocean isn't out there in the dark.
Is that the ultimate form of human resilience? Or is it just sheer willful foolishness?
According to the philosophical framework of Camus, it is both. It is the defining paradox of the human condition.
It ties directly back to his essay on the myth of Sisyphus.
We must imagine Sisyphus happy, pushing the boulder up the hill, even knowing with absolute certainty that it will roll back down.
We must build the sandcastle. We must love and work and heal.
But, and this is the crucial distinction Rieux makes, we must build it with our eyes open.
We must build it without the dangerous illusion that the sandcastle will last forever.
And that profound realization brings us to the end of our journey through the quarantined streets of Oran.
We've covered a massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We've gone from the initial stubborn denial of a single dead rat on a doorstep to the terrifying psychological flattening of time during lockdown.
We've seen how extreme crisis strips away our complexities until we become mirrors for core moral choices.
And how a biological disaster serves serves as a brilliant, if deeply complicated, metaphor for fascist occupation, totalitarian oppression, and the haunting legacy of colonialism.
If we bring all of this vast historical and philosophical analysis back to you, the listener, the sources highlight one final lingering thought.
It is Dr. Rieux's ultimate realization as he listens to the jubilant cheers of the city from his balcony.
It is a realization that echoes far beyond 1940s Algeria and speaks directly to the structure of our modern world.
Rieux knows, as a man of science and a man of experience, that the plague bacillus never truly dies.
It never disappears completely.
It just waits.
It waits patiently.
It can lie dormant for years, for decades.
It sleeps in bedrooms, in cellars, in old trunks, in handkerchiefs, and hidden in bookshelves.
It bides its time until the day when, either to teach humans a harsh lesson or simply to bring them arbitrary misery, it will wake up its rats once again and send them to die in a happy, unsuspecting city.
So the next time you step out your front door into your perfectly ordinary, predictable routine, I want you to hold on to this final, provocative thought.
When a massive crisis ends, whether it is a deeply personal tragedy, a global health event, or a massive societal upheaval, we are always so incredibly desperate to just get back to normal.
But if the plague is always hiding in the background, sleeping in the fabric of our society, waiting in the shadows of our daily commerce, what if the normal we are so desperately rushing back to is exactly the environment that allowed the plague to take hold in the first place?